The biker smirked, leaning down to eye level with the old veteran. His dirty leather boot pressed hard against the shiny Marine Corps pin on the floor, slowly crushing it. "Pick it up," he growled. "With your good hand." The coffee shop held its breath. The old veteran stared at the floor, the empty sleeve pinned neatly to his side trembling just a little. Nobody moved. The air was thick with fear. But in the dark corner of the room, a black man wearing a faded baseball cap slowly closed his laptop. To the biker gang, he looked like just another nobody. They had no idea he was a tomb guard from Arlington National Cemetery. And in the exact next 60 seconds, they would learn a brutal lesson. Some men should never be mistaken for weak. What would you do if you saw a man who bled for this country getting disrespected right in front of you? Honor is not something you can just take. It is earned through blood and sacrifice. If you believe that veterans who left a piece of themselves on the battlefield deserve absolute respect, hit that subscribe button and comment the word respect down below to honor them today. This story is not just about a fight. It is about a soldier's unbreakable oath. Let's see what happens when arrogant bullies wake up the quiet hero hiding in plain sight. The Brew was a small, quiet coffee shop tucked away just a few miles from the hallowed grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name, and the brass bells on the front door chimed a warm welcome every time someone walked in. On this particular Sunday morning, the air inside was thick with the rich, comforting smell of freshly roasted coffee beans and warm cinnamon pastries. The morning sun streamed through the large front windows, casting a golden glow over the worn wooden tables and the mismatched, comfortable chairs. Soft, instrumental jazz played quietly in the background, blending perfectly with the gentle hum of friendly conversations and the rhythmic hissing of the espresso machine. For the locals, the Brew was not just a place to get a quick drink. It was a safe haven. It was a sanctuary away from the noise and chaos of the outside world. Behind the wooden counter stood Lena, the hard-working owner who poured her heart and soul into every single cup she served. Lena was a kind woman with a bright smile, and she made it her personal mission to memorize the favorite orders of all her regular customers. She knew exactly how people liked their coffee, and she always took the time to ask about their families. The walls of the coffee shop were decorated with a deep sense of community pride. There was a large corkboard covered in local flyers, children's drawings, and small, faded photographs of men and women from the neighborhood who had served in the military. It was a peaceful, respectful environment. People came here to read the morning newspaper, to catch up with old friends, or just to sit in silence and enjoy the warmth of the sun. Sitting right by the largest front window, exactly where he sat every single Sunday, was an older gentleman named Ray. He had his reading glasses perched on his nose and a steaming mug of plain black coffee resting on the table in front of him. The shop was a picture of perfect, uninterrupted peace. No one could have possibly predicted that in just a few short minutes, this quiet sanctuary would be violently shattered. Ray Thompson was a fixture at the Brew coffee shop every Sunday morning. At 70 years old, He carried the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much and asked for too little. His right sleeve was always neatly folded and pinned to the shoulder of his jacket. He lost that arm in the dense jungles of Vietnam decades ago. It was a permanent, daily reminder of the brutal price of freedom. But Ray never complained about his missing limb. He just drank his black coffee, read his worn paperbacks, and watched the world go by. On the left side of his jacket, right over his heart, he wore a single, slightly tarnished Marine Corps pin. But that pin was not his own. It belonged to his best friend, a young man who fought by his side but never made it on the flight back home. To Ray, that tiny piece of metal was not just a decoration. It was a gravestone he carried with him every single day. It was a silent promise that his brother in arms would never be forgot. Ray was not a fragile man, but he was old, he was lonely, and the heavy years had made him tired. The people in town knew his story, and they respected him deeply. They knew, too, leave the old soldier to his peace. 2 tables away from Ray, sitting in the darkest corner of the shop, was a man who seemed entirely invisible. Sergeant Marcus Reed was 32 years old, but his eyes carried the intense, focused weight of someone much older. Today, he was just a guy in faded jeans, a plain dark jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. You would never guess that underneath that ordinary civilian clothing was one of the most elite and disciplined soldiers on Earth. Marcus was a sentinel, a black tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery. He spent his days walking the mat, counting exactly 21 steps, guarding the unknown soldiers with absolute, unbroken perfection in their rain, snow, and blistering heat. He knew who Ray was. They had never formally spoken, but Marcus recognized a brother in arms. Marcus's own father was a military man who died when Marcus was just a young boy. From his father, he learned one simple, unbreakable truth. Duty does not end when the uniform comes off. Marcus sat quietly, nursing his coffee, keeping a watchful eye on their room. He did not seek out trouble, but he was trained to be ready for it the second it arrived. The peaceful Sunday morning shattered the second the front door was kicked open. The cheerful chime of the entrance bell was completely drowned out by the roar of heavy motorcycle engines outside, and the loud thud of steel-toed boots stomping onto the wooden floor. 5 massive men walked in. They wore heavy leather vests, patched with the grim skull emblem of the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club. Leading the pack was Jake Malone, a man who built his entire reputation on fear and intimidation. Jake was 38, built like a brick wall, and had a permanent sneer that told you he enjoyed making innocent people uncomfortable. Behind him walked Tommy, a nervous hothead who loved cheap shots. Next was Spike, a giant who relied purely on brute force, followed by Mitch and Carl, 2 cowards who blindly laughed at whatever cruel joke their leader made. They did not just enter the coffee shop. They invaded it. They pushed past a young couple, knocking over an empty chair, demanding space. Jake looked around, his cold eyes scanning the room for the best spot. His gaze landed right on the large, comfortable corner table near the window. The exact table where Ray Thompson was sitting quietly, reading his book. Jake marched straight toward the window, his gang flanking him like a pack of hungry wolves locking onto a target. He slammed his heavy hand flat onto Ray's table, rattling the old man's coffee cup. Ray slowly looked up from his book, his wrinkled face completely calm. Jake leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale beer and cheap tobacco. "Move, old man," Jake said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "We want this table." Ray did not flinch. He just looked up at Jake and spoke softly. "There are plenty of empty tables in the back." "I am already sitting here." Jake let out a cruel, barking laugh. The other bikers snickered behind him, crossing their arms to look tough. Jake leaned down again, casting a massive shadow over the seated veteran. "I don't think you heard me, old cripple. I said move." Lena, the owner of the coffee shop, rushed out from behind the front counter, her hands shaking. "Please, Jake," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "Leave him alone. He is not bothering anybody." Jake turned his head slowly, glaring at Lena with dead, cold eyes. "Shut your mouth, sweetheart, or me and the boys are gonna start breaking things in this little shop of yours." Lena froze in terror. The entire coffee shop went dead silent. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to make a sound. Ray slowly closed his book, realizing there was no peaceful way out of this situation. But before the old Marine could even stand up, Jake decided to take his cruelty one step further. Ray stood up slowly. He did not want any trouble, but he was a Marine. And he was not going to be bullied. Jake saw the old man move, but his cold eyes suddenly locked onto the shiny object resting over Ray's heart. The Marine Corps pin. Jake reached out with lightning speed. His thick fingers grabbed the metal, pulling hard, tearing it right off Ray's jacket. The old fabric ripped with a sickening sound. Ray gasped, instinctively reaching out with his one good hand, but Jake held the pin up high in the air, mocking him. "What is this?" Jake sneered. "Some kind of prize for losing." Then Jake opened his hand. He let the pin drop. It hit the wooden floor with a tiny, sharp click. Before Ray could even move, Jake lifted his heavy, steel-toed leather boot and slammed it down directly on top of the metal, grinding it into the dirt. Ray stared at the floor, his heart breaking. That pin belonged to a ghost. It was sacred. Jake leaned in, whispering with pure malice. "Pick it up," he growled. "With your good hand." The silence in the room was deafening. It was a moment of pure, unforgivable disrespect. The line had not just been crossed. It had been completely destroyed. In the far corner of the room, there was a soft click. Marcus Reed slowly closed his laptop. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He did not rush. He did not yell. He walked with the slow, measured, and absolute precision of a tomb guard. Every single step was deliberate. He stopped a few feet away from the bikers, placing himself firmly between Jake and the old veteran. Jake looked over his shoulder, highly annoyed. He sized Marcus up, seeing just a black man in a faded cap and a plain jacket. "Sit down, hero," Jake scoffed. "This has nothing to do with you." Marcus did not blink. His face was a mask of cold stone. He looked at Jake, then down at the heavy boot resting on the marine pin. Jake noticed the intense stare and laughed. He looked Marcus up and down with absolute disgust. "What?" Jake said, a nasty smirk spreading across his face. "They let guys like you play soldier at Arlington now. That jacket does not make you one of them. You people always think a little badge makes you important. Go back to your coffee before you get hurt." The room went colder. The air felt dangerously heavy. Marcus did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, chilling authority of a man who knows exactly what he is capable of. "Take your boot off that pin," Marcus said. Just 7 words. But they hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's face twisted with rage. Nobody talked to him like that. He lunged forward, throwing a massive, wild punch aimed right at Marcus's head. But Marcus was not there. Moving with lightning speed and zero wasted energy, Marcus stepped off the center line. He caught Jake's wrist, twisted it sharply, and used the big man's own momentum to send him crashing face first into a heavy oak table. The sound of bone hitting wood echoed like a gunshot. Jake crumpled to the floor, instantly out of the fight. Tommy, the hothead, rushed in from the blind side holding a heavy glass coffee mug. Before Tommy could even swing, Marcus pivoted on his heel. He delivered a brutal, precise strike directly to Tommy's floating rib. Tommy dropped the mug and collapsed to his knees, gasping for air that would not come. Spike the giant roared and charged like a bull. He threw his huge arms out, trying to crush Marcus in a bear hug. Marcus did not panic. He dropped his weight, shifted his hips underneath Spike, and threw the massive biker over his shoulder. Spike went flying, slamming hard into the wooden front counter. The wood splintered, and the giant slid to the ground, groaning once before passing out. Panic set into Mitch and Carl's eyes. They attacked together, trying to overwhelm Marcus with numbers in the tight space. Marcus grabbed a heavy wooden chair, using it as a shield to block Mitch's punch, then drove the leg of the chair hard into Carl's knee. Carl screamed and went down instantly. Marcus tossed the chair aside, grabbed Mitch by the leather collar, swept his legs out from under him, and pinned him to the floor with a knee pressed firmly against the back of his neck. Silence returned to the brew coffee shop. Less than 60 seconds had passed. 5 massive bikers were scattered across the floor, groaning in pain, completely broken. Marcus Reed stood in the center of the wreckage. He was not breathing hard. His clothes were not even wrinkled. He slowly adjusted his baseball cap, looking down at the men bleeding at his feet. "You came in here looking for a weak man," Marcus said, his voice completely calm and steady. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Ray Thompson. "But you chose a room full of soldiers." Marcus stepped away from Mitch and walked slowly over to where Jake was groaning on the floor. The biker gang leader was clutching his face, his pride completely shattered. Marcus stood over him, his shadow falling across Jake's bruised face. He pointed a steady finger at the dirty wooden floor. "Get up on your knees," Marcus ordered. His voice was low, but it carried absolute authority. Jake hesitated, glaring up with hatred, but one look into Marcus's cold, unflinching eyes told him that refusing would be a terrible mistake. Slowly, shaking with pain and humiliation, Jake pushed himself up onto his knees. "Pick it up," Marcus said. Jake looked down at the crushed Marine Corps pin resting in the dirt. He reached out with trembling fingers and picked up the tiny piece of metal. "Wipe it clean," Marcus commanded. Jake rubbed the pin against his leather vest, clearing away the dust and dirt from his heavy boot. When the metal shined again, Marcus pointed toward the old veteran. Jake crawled on his knees across the floor until he was directly in front of Ray Thompson. He held the pin up, offering it back to the man he had just mocked. "Say what you did," Marcus said, standing right behind Jake. Jake swallowed hard. His voice was barely a whisper. "I disrespected a Marine." Marcus did not move. "Again." Louder, Jake closed his eyes, completely defeated. "I disrespected a Marine who gave more for this country than I ever will." Ray reached out with his one good hand and gently took the pin back. He did not say a word to Jake. He did not have to. Marcus then forced Jake to pull out his wallet, dropping a thick stack of $100 bills on the table to pay for Lena's broken counter. 10 minutes later, the wail of police sirens pierced the quiet Sunday morning. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt outside the brew. Officers rushed through the door with their hands on their belts, expecting a massive riot. Instead, they found 5 enormous bikers sitting quietly on the floor, nursing their broken bones, while a man in a baseball cap calmly drank his coffee in the corner. Lena immediately showed the police the security camera footage. As the officers watched the screen, their eyes widened. The local sheriff walked over and grabbed Jake by the collar, pulling him to his feet. It turned out that the Iron Reapers had been terrorizing small businesses in the neighboring towns for months. They used fear and intimidation to extort shop owners, always traveling in a pack, always picking on people too weak to fight back. But seeing these massive, terrifying men beat and humiliated by a single person completely broke their spell of fear. As the police marched Jake and his gang out of the coffee shop in handcuffs, a crowd of locals gathered on the sidewalk. They watched the mighty Iron Reapers get shoved into the back of police cruisers, their terrifying reputation ruined forever. The footage from Lena's camera would soon go viral, ensuring that Jake Malone would never be able to show his face in this town, or any other town, ever again. The coffee shop finally emptied out, leaving only Lena, Ray, and Marcus. Ray stood by his table, holding the polished marine pin tightly in his palm. He walked slowly over to the dark corner, where Marcus was quietly packing up his laptop. Ray studied the younger man. He noticed the perfect posture, the disciplined stillness, and the quiet intensity in his eyes. Ray had spent his entire life around soldiers, and he knew a warrior when he saw one. "You do not fight like a regular civilian, son," Ray said softly. "Where did you serve?" Marcus paused. He looked at the old Marine and stood up straight, his hands resting by his sides. "I am stationed at Arlington, sir." "I walk the mat." Ray's eyes widened in profound realization. "A tomb guard." Suddenly, the absolute discipline and the lightning-fast reaction made perfect sense. But there was something else. Ray looked closely at Marcus's face, a distant memory sparking in his mind. "What is your last name, Sergeant?" Ray asked. "Reed, sir." "My father was Master Sergeant Thomas Reed." Ray took a slow, deep breath. A single tear welled up in the old man's eye. He remembered a military funeral many years ago, standing in the pouring rain, saluting a man who had saved countless lives overseas. Ray looked at the son standing before him, a man who had inherited his father's quiet strength. "Your father would have been incredibly proud of you today, son," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus looked down at the floor for the very first time that morning. Then he looked back up, his eyes shining with quiet resolve. "He taught me not to walk past dishonor, sir. Months passed, and things changed forever at the brew. The coffee shop was no longer just a place to grab a quick morning drink. Lena cleared out the large space near the front window and officially named it the Honor Corner. She hung framed photographs of local veterans on the wall, draped a small American flag in the center, and placed a permanent brass plaque on Ray Thompson's favorite table. Every Sunday morning, the shop was filled with men and women who had served their country. The younger generation of soldiers sat side by side with the veterans of older wars, drinking coffee, sharing stories, and finding a community they thought they had lost. And every Sunday, right across the table from Ray sat Marcus Reed. They never talked about the fight again. They just enjoyed the quiet peace that they had both fought so hard to protect. Miles away, the scene shifts to the pristine white marble of Arlington National Cemetery. The rain is pouring down in sheets, soaking the ground. But pacing back and forth in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier is Sergeant Marcus Reed. He is in his immaculate dress blue uniform. His rifle rests perfectly on his shoulder. He takes exactly 21 steps. He turns. He waits 21 seconds. Total, unbroken perfection. A tomb guard does not stop guarding when he leaves the marble. Because honor is not a uniform you take off at the end of the day. It is a choice. A choice to stand up when others sit down. A choice to speak out when silence becomes permission. And a choice to remind the world that no veteran who gave a piece of himself for his country should ever be treated like he is worth less than the ground he walks on.